And we're on. Super. Thanks for having us, Richard. Thanks for having you as well.
Pleasure.
I've been a fan of you for a while right now because I think we've been talking in and out for a year and a half right now. I think I reached out to you last year in terms of the partnership of you guys flying in here as well. But you know, us doing this podcast as well, I think it's really interesting what you guys do, and it sort of goes together with the mobility aspect of everything. And you are really sort of on the innovative side of things. So I think I'm really, or we are really sort of interested in hearing like your story about gravity, how that all, you know, came together and that whole, I mean, because you have the Iron Man mask behind you as well. And it's not the first time I heard it, that the Iron Man from England, because I think that sort of goes together with what you guys are doing. And it's a really thing. So yeah, it's really interesting to sort of hear like where you are right now and sort of where we're planning to be maybe in the next 5 years. Like, is this something you see everyone flying around in the next 5 years, or is this more like closed system eventually?
Well, I mean, if I just sort of summarize, kind of recap where this all came from, then that kind of, I think, helps explain our forward trajectory. Yeah, my background, I was an oil trader with BP in London, you know, the oil company. I spent 6 years or so in the British Royal Marines Reserve here as well. And my whole family background was from the world of aviation and engineering. So unlike my conventional career, I actually took, I suppose, the inspiration from my family background and I suppose my childhood passion for building, making, designing, building, you know, putting things together. And the lessons that the Royal Marines taught me around human capability. You know, it's amazing what you can train the human mind and body to do if you have the sufficient motivation. And I suppose I took all that together back in 2016, adapted a load of existing technology, trialed a load of things that really should never have worked. Wasn't afraid from failure as long as I could get back up again and I wasn't hurting myself or anybody else. And as you can see, you know, on all our social media, on our YouTube at Gravity Industries, you can see the journey we went on, and to our slight surprise, ended up being able to fly really quite competently back in 2016. And then since then, we've scaled it, developed the technology quite significantly. And just before COVID hit, we'd delivered over 100 events in 31 countries. We were scaling towards a race series. We've got search and rescue and military collaborations. And yeah, from a technology point of view, we really haven't even scraped the surface yet. So it's been quite an unusual journey. Yeah, it's been really quite enthralling. Having said all that, you know, we don't aspire at the moment to kind of revolutionize how human beings travel around in a mainstream fashion. I think one analogy would be this is almost like a bit like a Formula One car, or, you know, sort of racing car. You know, they're great and they sound great. They look really, really fun. They get lots of excitement and inspiration around them, but they're not a practical everyday tool. I'd say that, you know, jet suits is a bunch sitting behind me. They are very capable, but, you know, as a mainstream form of transport, no, I mean, you know, they're not ready for that yet. However, then again, the first motor cars were considered noisy, smelly, inefficient, dangerous, crazy, and rubbish compared to a horse. And look what relentless improvement and enhancement has gone and done to the motor car. So, you know, I think racing is where it's at for us at the moment, scaling the enormous impact we've had from a social media and mainstream media perspective, and kind of supersizing that and bringing it to live audiences all over the world.
That's really impressive, like considering that you are a 5 years old company right now, and your first flight you had 2000. Yeah. How was the first flight you guys had? That must have been really interesting when you actually lift up for the first time and you realize the whole thing is working and it's going. Like, how many test flights did you guys have, or was it like this, and then you were up in the air?
I think we. I mean, the very first flight was back in 2016, about November 2016. It was only a few seconds. You know, and now I must have done hundreds of different test flights, let alone all the events and everything. Yeah, it's been a kind of crazy journey. Do you want to ask me that question again? I've just realised something just popped up. Can I just some message just popped up? I have a horrible feeling that my PA has gone and double booked me here, which is fine. We'll carry on, but
no worries. Yeah, let's carry on. Yeah, because I felt that it must, because it's so innovative, and I think I picked up you flying around with the suit in one of the Formula One races, if I'm correct, or event similar like that. And as you said, like I think
Yeah.
is it some yeah.
Sorry, ask me the question again. Sorry, yeah, I am double booked, but never mind. I've just told my PA to sort it out.
Oh wow.
Sorry, go ahead. Ask the question again. Can you? Sorry.
Yeah, of course. So, like, I've seen you guys flying around, I think, in one of the Formula One events, and I do agree that because it's loud and it sort of goes together with the racing aspect of things. It's really like on the high point of things. But I'm also interested, like when you first started out and you were flying for a few seconds at the first time, and I only can imagine that was a continuous process in terms of developing. Like how long did it take you to transfer from writing down to actually making a product that worked, or were you just straight up tinkering, where you're just like, I want to do this, and you started, having pieces together and went from there? Like, how was that process for you? Was this just like in your mind, or did you write it out at first, or?
Yeah, for some months I was sketching different ideas, taking the concept of adding a certain amount of horsepower to the human frame and working out how you could, kind of, I mean, it sounds kind of crude, but where would you attach that horsepower? How could you try and leverage the natural human balance and stability in a way that would allow you to pick this up as quickly and as intuitively as possible? I mean, what we do now looks, I think, pretty obvious, but it wasn't obvious when we started. I mean, for instance, I had engines on the back of my legs and my arms as well, which we've moved away from the leg engines. But yeah, I sketched lots of different ideas, but then there's no real substitute for getting out there and actually testing and trying this. For instance, I didn't really know if the thrust from the engines would actually create a gyroscopic moment, would create some kind of instability. I mean, it sounds ludicrous, but there was some school of thought that said that actually there might be other forces other than directly parallel with the axle of the jet engine. When you see a garden hose, it kind of flails around. Now that's actually quite obvious because you've got the attachment between the nozzle and the rest of the hose, which creates this kind of resistance to it actually propelling itself. But it's a good example, nonetheless, of how you get a very wild, uncontrollable motion. I didn't really think I'd experience that, but you never really know unless you go and try it. And actually, the experience back in 2016 with the very first jet engine was this very consistent, smooth push. You can see the clips, as I say, on our social media at Take on Gravity or Gravity Industries on YouTube. And there's one of the first, I think I've done 5 TED Talks now, the very first one. I've got all the clips showing where I was holding this jet engine, and you can just see it. It's just this strong, firm, fire hose-like push. So that sort of validated the theory, and then it was just a question of adding more engines and working out how you could keep stable and keep it as intuitive as possible. So yeah, it quickly went from sort of drawing, sketching through to actually learning from trying.
How much like physical power you need to have in order to maintain the flight? Because I reckon it's not easy to shift around with that power with your arms. Obviously, that's something you're planned, but like with your arm strength and everything, you need to be quite fit in order to sort of maintain the suit. Would you say?
Yeah, in the early days. Yeah, in the early days, the background I had from particularly calisthenics, this kind of urban gymnastics kind of thing is quite popular now on social media, where you see people doing like flags, holding themselves off to one side and muscle ups and things. I got into doing that after I left the Marines, just as really a filler for my lunch breaks when I used to go to the gym next to my office. And I got reasonably good at it because I'm quite light and quite strong for my weight, and I used to do lots of running as well, which keeps you light. So that was really super useful in the early days when I was trying to wrestle all this horsepower in a way often that wasn't very intuitive and wasn't very comfortable. But actually, we've refined these so much now that these suits in the background, we can train most of the clients that come and learn with us. We can train most fit, capable people within a morning, and they get clipped in with a rope on their back, and they pick it up really quickly. And it's because we've refined subtleties like the angles of the arm engines are tweaked now in a way that means that some of the thrust actually goes to lift the weight of the engines. And after that, it's just like you're leaning on a kind of kitchen sink. In fact, you can do a fun experiment where you get the bathroom scales, get your bathroom scales, weigh yourself, and then lean forward onto the sort of kitchen sink or bathroom sink without hopefully wrecking the sink. and keep leaning forward until you've got 1/3 of your body weight registering on the scales. And that's roughly what it feels like flying. It's actually really very easy now, surprisingly.
Do you see, like, you mentioned that you have a lot of plans to work in terms of military, do you rescue operations, but like in future, do you see this something for more of a different solution for commoners as well? Like I or someone else could go to a store in 20 years, in 15 years, to buy a product which is not necessarily as, you know, powerful as the one that maybe people in rescue operations use, but still could operate it. Do you think that's something planned to do, right? Or this only be for the different sectors of, let's say, military, let's say racing,
Yeah, well, we have
safety equipment?
Yeah, we have actually sold a couple. So when people come and train with us, if they get sufficiently capable, and as I say, it can often only take a day to get pretty good at flying, still on the tether, but it usually takes a couple more days before we're happy that they come off the tether. And then it's like riding a bike. You never forget. It's very intuitive and really as safe as you want to fly it. Then when we've got to know that customer, then we will then sell them a suit. We still tend to keep hold of them to maintain them for them, but we have sold them. But it's more like, for instance, that super high-end Ferrari, the FFX or whatever it's called, the one which is almost a Formula One car. They sell that for a lot of money to you, and then they actually, I don't think, even let you take that away. They sort of look after it and make it available, make it ready for you when you want to go and do it, do track days with it and stuff. It's almost like that, and we have that philosophy because, or that approach, because we really quite like the idea of keeping our customers safe and therefore us keeping a close eye on how they fly them. I mean, to be really clear, you can just open the throttle, and if you choose, you'll just keep going up for as long as you wish. So obviously,
oh, wow.
it'll get dangerous very quickly. Now, we never fly like that. My team never fly like that. We fly pretty fast and fairly high over water, but only ever as high as we'd reluctantly accept falling from in the very unlikely circumstance you had a technical problem. You can never entirely eliminate it. There's no point in wearing a parachute unless you go really high, and how do you make that safe to get that high? We don't have wings on most of them anyway, and even the ones we do, they're not sufficient to glide acceptably if you had a power problem. So, safety is always at the forefront here. We always try and minimize the risk. So we would struggle to minimize that risk if we just sold these out to people and watched them go out the door and just wonder what they would do with them. So, we don't need to do that. We keep people safe by controlling the environment that they train in.
Yeah, I think it's great to sort of maintain it as to sort of, because you want to know what happens with the climb as well. So theoretically, you can fly as high as humanly possible, but you need to have a way down as well, because obviously, with the right equipment, let's say you have like a mask and everything, your oxygen mask, you can fly up there, but you need a way to go down as well.
Well, I mean, think about skydivers. I mean, they go to 10,000 feet. I think it's about 10,000 feet before you start.
10,000, yeah.
Yeah, before, and I mean, they're not wearing oxygen masks. I mean, it gets pretty cold up there. It's not a collection of problems we spend any time worrying about, but you just keep going up, and as long as your fuel would last. I mean, you could then come down with a parachute, or you could save enough fuel that you can fly back down again. The thing that dawned on us is that despite going high is an innate human interest. It's always a question we get: oh, how high could you go? Well, very high, many thousands of feet. Actually, there's nothing up there apart from a lot of danger. There's no people to rescue. There's no military objectives. There's no audiences. There's no lessons to be really learned. Actually, when you really deconstruct it, we've never seen much of an appeal in going really high. All the fun stuff is flying low to the ground. So it's not really been one of our core objectives just to go super high and rely on a parachute or anything like that. So we're quite happy, quite low to the ground for the time being.
Is there climate-wise? Is there any obstacles that can you fly a cold? Is flying in a cold climate a little bit different than flying, let's say, in parts of England, flying in a warm climate, or?
Yeah. So jet engines work best with cold, dense air. So sea level with cold air, and then they turn that cold, dense air into hot air, which is propelled violently out the back, and that's how you generate the thrust. So if you fly at altitude, so Johannesburg and the mountains in Arizona are two places at about 6,000 feet. You've got about 20%, I think, less air density there, and you therefore have 20% less power. From a temperature point of view, you really notice the difference between a sort of 10 degrees centigrade, sort of pretty cold UK day versus a 20, 30 degrees centigrade a day. I mean, I've flown in 45 degrees centigrade in India, in Australia, in Dubai, Saudi, and you really notice the reduction in air density. So yeah, it makes a difference. It just eats into your reserve power. That's all.
So theoretically, Finland would be a great place to, if you haven't flown here already, that might be a great place for you.
Out of the 31 countries we've flown in, Finland has not been one of them. In fact, we've not flown in Scandinavia. We get a lot of interest from Scandinavia, but I mean, COVID does not help. But yeah, if there's a sort of commercial, corporate, convention, event, festival type thing, then we could happily, I mean, quite ridiculously, these things pack into check-in suitcases. You just turn up and within about 10 minutes can go flying. And you can run them on diesel, road diesel if you want. That's we run road diesel at most events because it's much easier to get hold of than jet fuel. So yeah, if there's an event, notwithstanding all the challenges of COVID, if there's an event or a stunt or flying alongside, over a river or crossing some water, you've got plenty of interesting water crossings and things in the wider Scandinavian region. So yeah, it'd be a pleasure. And yes, cold weather. I mean, we've never flown in such cold weather. We've flown in snow before. We've flown at minus probably 5 or 6 degrees centigrade before, so nothing crazy. I think if you go super cold, you're probably in danger, like of things like plastics and rubbers starting to get brittle, metal even starting to get more brittle until it's warmed up, and possibly even fuel. I mean, I know you have to do crazy things about warming up your engines, don't you, in the winter, and
yeah, absolutely,
flaming fuel under them and stuff. I would suspect if you're going to get to crazy minus 20, 30 degrees centigrade, that would start to introduce a bunch of things we've never encountered before, where you might end up getting some interesting problems. But generally, no. Generally, no.
In Finland, I remember like in winter and the cold weather in military, we had to turn out the cars, I think, even 1 hour or half an hour before we left anything, because it was just the engines were just so cold, specifically if they were left outside for the night.
I think when they're warmed up, when most vehicles and engines and things are warmed up, it's fine. It's if they've been left outside and gone very cold, it's how do you get them warm enough to safely start. So I think the same thing would apply with us. If we probably kept them room temperature and then walked outside, started up and went, I reckon we'd be all right. But maybe wind chill on some of the fuel lines, I don't know. Anyway, interesting bunch of challenges we'd have to think about.
Absolutely. So you mentioned you carry those with the luggage as well. Like, do you literally like check them in when you travel? Have you had any problems with the people? They just open it up and be like, okay.
So only once in Switzerland and twice, 3 times in America. But I mean, out of probably 200 international flights, that's not a bad success rate. Because we just take the fuel out, it's just a bunch of inert metal. Even the starting batteries come out and then go in the hand luggage, and that's fine. The only problems we've had is that sometimes when you're running jet fuel smells quite strong sometimes. And if you open the suitcase, you can get a waft of the vapor. I mean, it's a waft of the smell, the residual smell. It's very hard to get that smell out sometimes. And sometimes some security folks have gone, well, it must be gasoline or explosive or something, and not been very enthusiastic. And we've had to sort of air freight the luggage later on. But no, generally it's been okay. Sorry, just took a phone call. Yes, carry on.
Oh, no worries. Talking about actually fuel and fuel efficiency, how is that something you're continuously developing? Like how much sort of fuel you can travel with right now? Do you see this something you want to develop further, let's say in the future?
So it's most, I mean, trying to improve the fundamental fuel efficiency of a centrifugal compressor turbojet is quite hard. Essentially, the bigger they get, the more efficient they get, roughly. But we're also all the time trying to keep this system from becoming just a small aircraft that you're a passenger in. So you're a bit limited on that front. One interesting area is you can generate lift from wings. That's a big area. In fact, that's what we should be out doing tomorrow flying with wings. Again, you can see a lot on social media of us doing this. As you start to generate lift from wings, as you start to flatten out and fly, propelling yourself with the engines to generate lift, then that's a lot more efficient. So there's some big wins to be had there, and also you go a lot faster. So in the time you have to burn the fuel, you can achieve more distance. And we are building heavier lift versions, which therefore can lift more fuel. But again, it's fundamentally not a very efficient way of flying for a long distance with a bunch of small jet engines. This is why the airline industry has gone to very large engines. You notice, the 747s that have been retired recently, actually their engines look tiny now compared to the engines on modern airliners. You want large diameter engines to be efficient, and we're right at the
Do you
end of the
think?
spectrum.
Do you think the model that you have right now with Gravity, with the engines in your arm, you mentioned you had previously on the leg as well. Do you think this is something that's going to stick, or is there maybe a different model coming in the future? Is this the most efficient way of traveling right now in terms of?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I think so. We're always trying slightly different things. There is such a huge advantage in using the arms as part of the control. We want to steer away from an ECU controlled vector system. It's not difficult now to build that kind of stuff because of drone technology, using a little gyro to create natural stability. It's actually a little scary though, because if that balancing system goes wrong, there is a scenario where it can accelerate you upwards, and within seconds you're hundreds of feet and very dangerous. There's something quite nice about the way we fly. It is using your brain and your arms. I mean, there's no scenario where I've never experienced it in 41 years, where my arms suddenly go and do something that I wasn't expecting. So it's actually quite nice in an almost bicycle-like way. You're cycling along. What encouragement have you ever got to suddenly snap your handlebars around? Nothing. I mean, it just doesn't occur as a good idea. And in exactly the same way, you have that same fine, perfect precision control with how we fly. I think we'll be reluctant to move too far away from that.
So it's really easy to fine tune the sort of way you're traveling with your arms, you'd say.
It's ridiculous. I mean, there is clips on our social media during lockdown. We were doing some testing, and for fun, I managed to fly in and hover so precisely that my wife was able to hold out a cup of tea. It's very British. And I was able to actually drink a cup of tea from a mug, as in flying up, hovering. She was able to kind of let me drink, and then even she fed me some biscuits. I mean, you can literally move within a few millimeters of precision. It doesn't look like it's real. It's so crazy that your brain is so good at that balance. And I'm not just bigging myself up here. I'm useless at that stuff usually. The rest of my team can do this stuff as well. It is just amazing how the amount of power your brain has to be able to balance just when running, for instance. I was just out running this morning, and when you really think about the precision and control you have to momentary be stable every time your foot is fleetingly touching the ground, it's huge compared to what you need to do what we do. That's why people learn within a matter of minutes sometimes.
So I think it's really part of. I think it's a great example with the bicycle riding and with the running as well, because it sort of comes naturally, and once you learn it, it's there because it's so near with your arms as well. Where do you see, this is more of a general question, but like Gravity in, let's say, 5 or 10 years, are you more getting into with the military and that kind of solutions, or?
Well, I think 5 to 10 years is a long time to look forward. I mean, we've come a long way in 3 years. I would be very pleased if we built this race series that was a well-known, recognized, high-intensity, visceral, exciting Formula One of the skies that tours around different water locations around the world, inspiring crowds, especially young people, bringing an amazing entertainment spectacle that also transfers very powerfully to digital and to mobile. I think we can do that. I mean, we were about to go to Bermuda. We had 3 weeks to go before we were supposed to be flying out. Everything was in place, and then COVID obviously just threw that in the bin. So we're ready to go once we're allowed to do it, and we might do some sort of closed doors events later in the summer. I would be really pleased if that's established, because I think racing, it's amazing how racing is such a great way of developing a technology. As soon as you get competitive over something, people are going to want to really push the boundaries. If we keep doing it over water, it keeps it safe. I think that's something I really want to see develop. And then underneath that, lots of other activations where people can come and carry on learning to do this. We've set up several locations now, one in LA and two in the UK, where people can come and learn to do this, and even an electric version as well, where you can learn and feel the balance and control and get that amazing experience, but without all the noise and fumes of running actual jet engines. We're developing that. And yes, from a military point of view, using my Royal Marines background, we've really made some major inroads in the military world, where if you want to get special forces in or out of a place over probably only 2 or 3 miles, then we can do that in a really powerful way compared to a helicopter. So yeah, watch this space for that. That's a really exciting area. We'll have to see.
There will be a new kind of strike team coming in the future. I can only see this happening. And the race thing is incredibly interesting as well. Like if you guys had an event here in Finland flying around in lakes, I would definitely go and watch that, because it's really interesting, because I think
it looks like a real life kind of Marvel superhero thing. It is
yeah,
amazing. It is truly
exactly
amazing to do, and it looks pretty insane.
And in terms of like the areas that you can fly around, like on top of lakes or some insane place in Amazon or anywhere else, I think that sort of provides another aspect to it, because you can fly around in, you know, mountains and stuff.
Yeah.
By the way, like talking about flying, like what is the favorite place you've flown so far? Like what is the place that you sort of, you know, I could believe that I'm doing this for a living? Like is there a specific that comes to mind?
I mean, some pretty dramatic places, like, you know, I opened the baseball season in Japan by flying around the stadium on the first game of last year's season. You know, I mean, that's live across Japan, 30,000 people in the arena, you know, one shot, go start up those engines. You're waiting with the current suit, you're waiting about 45 seconds to start the engines up. The latest one is 10 seconds, which is crazy. So that 45 seconds, you're looking down at the engine thinking, you know, this isn't what I want to have some starting problems. But just for a fleeting moment, as you're flying around that stadium, looking at all the cameras all going off, and it's dark, and you've got, you know, you land and all this fire goes off, and it's just amazing. I mean, those kind of things are pretty memorable, but I have to say, the overriding feeling you have is one of hoping that you technically execute the event, you know, well. I would imagine a racing car driver, it's the same kind of thing where, sure, you're doing a really cool job, but there's a lot of pressure on you to do it safely and reliably and deliver the results. So that probably is the overriding feeling. That was a pretty special one. I mean, flying, we were in Iceland only a few weeks ago. That was pretty special. Shooting with Bear Grylls, that's going to come out in probably 6 months or so. That was very exciting. Amazing dramatic landscape. Those Arizona mountains were pretty special. I mean, there's been so many. I mean, literally 31 separate countries. I mean, you know, flying in Brazil was amazing. Johannesburg. It's hard to put a finger on a. They've all got their own unique things. I mean, how about this? I got requested by the Royal Navy and the British Embassy in Washington to fly around our brand new aircraft carrier, the Queen Elizabeth, off the coast of Washington, and fly out to go and meet and greet the Pentagon officials, all the kind of top brass from the US and UK Navy and military generally, in these little shuttle boats that were coming out with, you know, 50 of them on each one. That was insane. I mean, that was the footage from that, with a 360 camera on my shoulder here, which makes it look like some amazing drone. The footage from that on LinkedIn, of all platforms, did, I think, 9 million views. And there's me with my Royal Marines Green Beret on, flying out to go and, you know, meet these people. That was amazing. So yeah, lots and lots of pretty stunning events, really.
That's really one of those the future is here moments, I think.
Well, none of them were warned either that I was coming, which made it even more fun. So suddenly they could hear what sounded like a jet fighter. They all looked up, and then there's this Royal Marine just hovering in front of them, and then it's gone again. It was the best advert I could have ever imagined for just how amazing the system can be. So yeah, it was fun.
Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's Richard. Fantastic. Love it. So when talking about like specifically rescue missions, like what do you think it's the biggest sort of challenge with those? Like I see maybe sea rescue might be interesting. Like if someone is at the coast and something had happened, is this something you developed with already? Like are the people actively using Gravity's technology for this?
We're filming a trial later in September. It's going to be more land-based first responder you imagine a vehicle, Land Rover or something, is going to drive as close as possible to where, you know, somebody's had some medical emergency in the mountains somewhere. They're not quite sure where that person is, but there's, you know, bad weather, there's rivers in spate, you know, running high. There's pretty arduous terrain, and usually it'd be a walking team spending many hours trying to hike their way to get to some remote location. Well, you know, with this system, you can cover huge amounts of ground, you know, very quickly, and, you know, skimming low over the terrain. You wouldn't want to go up, you know, you wouldn't want to go up vertical cliff faces again. You just got to simply apply the rule. If I got a failure right now, am I going to be able to recover from it, as in physically? If you're 200 feet over a rocky cliff face, you know, it's just, I guess from a tactical military perspective, or a life or death, a patient perspective, maybe it's a risk you'd take. If somebody else's life is in danger, and, you know, you've got a probably 1 in 1,000 chance of there being a problem, you know, right at that moment, then maybe you take it. But generally, we're about covering ground very quickly and getting to awkward, difficult to reach places to help somebody in trouble. So that's what we're going to go and film. It'll be all over our social media probably later in, you know, the late summer, early autumn. We'll just have to see how it goes, but that's the plan.
So would this be more of a like rescue mission in a way that you fly there and maybe carry someone out? By the way, like asking about this, like is there a limit? Like, can you theoretically attach maybe something to your chest and lift the person up from the ground and then fly with?
I mean, the heavy lift version we've got, you could in theory, but it's not a sensible way of using the equipment. This is more about getting a first responder. It's a bit like, think in cities when, I'm sure you've got this in Finland, you often now see paramedics on motorbikes getting to a patient, a car crash or something really quickly, and applying first aid, stabilizing the patient, and waiting until an ambulance or a helicopter or something comes in. That first responder is the most critical stage, because a trained professional can stabilize a patient and radio back what the status of that person is. That's what we're about. We're like the motorbike of the skies in terms of getting to that patient, finding them, stabilizing them, potentially putting them on a stretcher. You know, we're going to potentially film some of this with a heavy lift drone later in the year as well, where a heavy lift drone could be called in to actually lift the patient, probably a dummy for now, but on that stretcher. But can the heavy lift drone get that patient onto a stretcher in a safe, stable way? No way. You know, you need a human being there. So I think we are that first responder. We're not going to be taking that patient out.
That will be very interesting in the future. Let's say in 10 years that this is normalized, that first responders around the world will use, you know, your technology to fly for the scene of whatever happened. And I think that will be quite a sight. And I think when that happens, there'll be quite a crowd trying to be applying to be a first responder, because I think the job description just lifted its popularity quite a bit. In the future. I think it's all incredibly interesting for you. Have you been in movies recently? Like, is this something like work with entertainment or?
Yeah, we've done lots of TV and documentary stuff. We haven't done any mainstream movies yet, although I do chat to Tom Cruise quite a bit, weirdly, because we did a talk show together for a while. I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up in some movies at some point, but movies have very, very slow lead times. You know, you've got to have a script, the script's got to be funded, then you've got to go and put the whole movie together, and then eventually you get to the point where some stuntmen or women are actually flying, and it's in the can, and then it has to be edited and then released. So you're talking many years. It's such a new thing that we do that it's going to be slow to creep its way into the narrative of a film, I think. But we've done loads of TV and documentary work.
I think I've seen board flying around. If you're probably familiar with, I don't remember the company name, but at some point that they had a board that's flown around. How is that sort of better what you do? I mean, compared to that, like, how is that?
A hoverboard, it's another interesting way of connecting the horsepower to a human being. I mean, they've got their strengths and weaknesses. There's some quite clear challenges with doing that. The key one, which I know all about, because when I had engines on the back of my legs, I had a similar problem, which is that when those engines are within, you know, this close to the ground, and if you're standing on the engine, the engine's right next to the ground, the 1,000 mile an hour exit velocity will destroy the ground. It'll literally pull tarmac apart. It'll kick debris up in the air, and it'll go in the engines, and you damage the engines. So this is why with a hoverboard you have to land and also take off from the same raised platform. It's like a sort of metal mesh that's 10 foot in the air, 6 foot in the air, which is a real pain, because that means to fly anywhere you have to bring that platform, and if you fly out you have to go back to where you started again. So we can fly pretty much anywhere, whereas that's a real pain even logistically to have to carry that thing around. And then on top of that, if you think about all the thrust underneath you, it's inherently quite unstable. So Frankie, who flies, he's quite famous for flying that hoverboard. I think he's quoted as saying it took him 600 hours or something insane to learn to do this. We've trained people to fly these in 5 minutes. It doesn't sound believable, that does it? But I mean, even there's some quite famous YouTubers like Colin Furze, who trained. He probably took a couple of days, and he only had a few goes each day. So because this is just inherently a lot more stable, it's a lot quicker to learn. So it's mostly that. It's mostly the fact that you can't land and take off from anywhere other than your own platform. That's probably the biggest issue. Oh, and also I suppose, I mean, I'd throw in there as well, we've realized that we can, unlike a traditional jetpack or the hoverboards, we can monitor our altitude and adjust our altitude super precisely. Because if you imagine those are my arm vectors, that thrust straight down. If I flare my arms out, there's less thrust going down, so I come down again. That very precise angle change is super precise and super sensitive. So I can adjust my altitude within millimeters instantly. Whereas when you've got a fixed set of engines and you're adjusting the thrust up and down, just like adjusting the throttle on a car, that's quite lazy. So it means you have to get quite quickly, quite high to give yourself enough altitude to be able to just adjust with the throttle. And you'll see jetpacks and hoverboards tend to, as they go forward, they tend to drop and then pick back up again as the pilot has had to increase the power again. Whereas we can just like skim the water surface, for instance, or ground surface very precisely because we have that fine control. That's another advantage, I think, in what we do.
Do you think it's a little bit different industry, but we are talking about like airlines previously, a little bit like what they're doing, like, and the size of the jet engines that they have. Do you think that they will be a competitor in the future in this area at all, or others? No, you don't see that happening.
I mean, even the airline engine manufacturers, GE and Rolls-Royce, for instance, I mean, they've just got bigger and bigger and bigger. They've actually more recently started, I think, to look at smaller engines for drones and things like that. But traditionally, this technology actually has come out of the model aircraft world and drone world, because the big guys all just focused on getting bigger, ever more efficient and quieter engines.
So you really have sort of freedom in your segment right now. There isn't too many. I honestly, like, there's quite a few years when I first unbelieved you guys, and I first, like, it's something I've never seen before. Immensely cool. So, it's just, I hope that there isn't too many players coming into the area, but I think the barrier of entry is quite hard as well.
We don't mind. I mean, and as I say, it's going to be mostly in the world of entertainment that we're going to see this sort of grow, I think. And yeah, it'd be great to come to Finland and do an event sometime if there's anybody who wants us to come and bring some unforgettable excitement or something. We'd love to come and do that.
Absolutely. Hey, Richard, it was really a pleasure for having you for the for this chat, and I would absolutely love you guys to have, like, maybe when this COVID situation sort of settles down a little bit and people can travel, once again, we can have you guys and maybe arrange a little event here when we fly around the lakes or some amazing surroundings such as that.
Great.
Super. Hey, let's end the recording on here.
Cool. Thanks so much. If you can mention our YouTube and social media, it's Take on Gravity is the main one for Instagram and stuff and Facebook and things, but also Gravity Industries is the name for YouTube. If you